I'm going to move to the first item on our agenda, and that is the Regional Parks Land Classification Program. I know there's a little and a short presentation from our staff, and if I get Matt to introduce who was on the Matthew, sorry, to introduce the team, and then we'll move into the PowerPoint. And I asked Councillor Fletcher, are you okay? I left the message, but are you okay to move this and I can second this?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that will be fine.
Thank you so much. So it's been moved and seconded, and I'll put it on the table. So Matthew, can you introduce the team and then move into the PowerPoint, please? Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you to the Chair and Councillors. Yes, it has been a very long day for you all. I'd just like to introduce who else is on the call today. So with us from my team, we have Tristan Lagoon, and we also have Joe Mackay, who will be presenting the report after this on the Regional Parks Management Plan draft. We also have Scott Silver, Manager Regional Parks, Taryn Crew, General Manager Community Facilities, Mace Ward, General Manager Park Sport and Recreation. No, I'm just looking through my list. I'm sure I've missed some people. Here we go. And we've got some others who are also supporting this call today. Also welcoming Justine Haves, our General Manager for our department. So we'll just we'll go straight to the presentation. And Maya, if you could just move to the next slide. So the purpose of the report today is to seek decisions from the committee on the classification program. And there's three parts to that. Firstly, there is Local Government Act land that we wish to declare to be reserve and to classify under the Reserves Act. The second recommendation is around classifying some regional park land that is already held as reserve under the Reserves Act that needs to be classified according to its primary purpose. And the third part is approving public notification of proposals to reclassify reserves so that they better align with their primary purpose, or in the case of a few reserves, to correct some previous errors in their classification. Next slide, please. So the first thing that we might be asking is, why is land classification necessary? And I know I've been through this before, so I won't dwell on this too long. So it's a mandatory requirement under the Reserves Act for all reserve land to be classified. And that is because when regional parks management plans, like other reserve management plans, are developed, the policies for the regional park that are held under the Reserves Act must align with the classification. It also enables some statutory processes such as leasing and licensing to be undertaken, and it also streamlines those processes as well. So where we put that proposal through a management plan process, it can then avoid the need to then subsequently publicly notify it if it's contemplated clearly in the plan. And the last point is just around the fact that we do have a significant number of reserve land parcels within the regional park network that are unclassified, and we need to deal with those. So next slide, thank you. So there's two main ways that regional park land is held and protected. So firstly, we have the majority of our land, probably around about 75% of it, is held in fee simple under the Local Government Act, and has that extra layer of protection of being protected in perpetuity by Order in Council. The second way that we hold land within the Regional Parks Network is under the Reserves Act, as I mentioned, and this is where it is also classified under that Act as well. And some of that land also is protected in perpetuity by Order in Council, where we hold it in fee simple. There is other land that has got underlying Crown ownership, where that Order in Council cannot apply. Next slide, please. So at our last workshop with the committee, the question was just raised about the differences in the way we manage land, whether it's held under the Local Government Act or the Reserves Act. And this slide here is just to show you at a high level just some of the differences between the two acts. So in a nutshell, the Local Government Act does provide us with greater flexibility in terms of the range of activities that can occur on regional parks, whereas the Reserves Act does prescribe the type of activities and what can occur where in a much more constrained fashion, depending upon what the classification of the reserve is. On the other hand, the Reserves Act does allow, as I said, for leases and licenses to not require further consultation if they're allowed with a certain amount of specificity within the plan. Whereas under the Local Government Act, leases that are longer than 6 months generally do require public consultation. The third point is that because the Reserves Act has some quite specific provisions in it, there's greater clarity about what the land is held for. So it's hardwired into the legislation. Whereas the Local Government Act has that general competence principle underlying it, which means that there's a greater reliance on other mechanisms such as the plan to achieve that consistent and integrated management. In terms of the matters that need to be considered when we're making decisions in the future about activities that can have on the Reserves Act, there's some mandatory stuff that needs to be considered in the Reserves Act, whereas under the Local Government Act, decision making is much more enabled and it's based upon the level of direction that's provided within the plan. In terms of enforcement powers, the Reserves Act has some additional enforcement powers that we can use, and in addition to other legislation is available to us, such as the Resource Management Act and the Biosecurity Act. Whereas under the Local Government Act, there's much more reliance upon enforcement powers through our bylaws, such as the Public Safety and Nuisance Bylaw and other legislation as well. And the last point is that the statutory requirements for regional parkland with, high natural and cultural values does really sit under other legislation rather than sitting within the Local Government Act itself, by and large, save for, of course, the bylaws. And whereas under the Reserves Act, there is much stronger protection for regional parkland with high natural and cultural values. And for this reason, mana whenua generally support to a greater degree land being held under the Reserves Act, particularly given the strong connection to Te Tiriti within that legislation. Next slide, please. So I just want to run through some things that have happened since the PACE Committee workshop on the 15th of September. So since that time, we've finished engagement with mana whenua, and you'll see in the Māori Impact section of the report what has been discussed and some of the views that have been expressed by different mana whenua entity. So one of the key changes we've made is in Muriwai Regional Park, where some proposals for land to the south of the main beach area, we have decided to do reclassification rather than retaining them under the Reserves Act. So what we heard from Te Karawamaki and also supported by Ngā Maunga Whakahia o Kaipara is that they would really like the land at Otakameru Point and Mokatia Special Management Zone and the Mitchelson Block to be reclassified from Recreation Reserve to Scenic Reserve to recognise those high natural values in that area. And following some further discussion internally, we've incorporated that proposal into the reclassification proposals that you'll find in Attachment D. Some of the proposals for classification of reserve land in the Hunua Ranges Regional Park have also changed following consultation with Watercare. And this is around the Lower Mangatawhiri Special Management Zone, which is under licence to Watercare, and which they retain the right within their licence during the term, which is a 100-year term, to develop a dam and reservoir within the zone if they need to in some time in the future. So what we've decided, as with other reserve areas covered by their licence, we are going to propose this land be classified as local purpose water conservation reserve. So originally we were looking at potentially scenic reserves classification, but because Watercare is wanting to retain rather than relinquish that right to develop that area, we're lining that classification up with other areas within the water catchment. The fourth point is that Mutakaroa Hamlin's Hill Regional Park, subject to the decisions that are going to be made by the committee shortly on the Regional Parks Management Plan, we've removed that from the scope of the land classification program to line with the recommendations about the draft plan. And the last point is that we have also undertaken informal consultation with elected members in the 5 affected local board areas. And I can provide you with a bit of an update about what we heard from one of the local boards, that's Franklin. So we didn't receive any feedback from 4 local boards, but we did receive feedback from Franklin about the proposal to classify reserve land within the Hunua Ranges Regional Park to local purpose water conservation reserve. So the feedback we received was that there was some concern about potential unintended consequences about developing the regional park for recreational purposes, including commercial activities, because of the constraints that potentially classifying that land as local purpose water conservation reserve might reinforce. And I guess they want to make sure that we're not inadvertently excluding use of that land in the longer term by doing this classification. And I think the 2 key areas that really concerned about is the area that I've just discussed before, which is the Lower Mangatawhiri area, but also the forestry area in the northwest of the park, which are 2 key areas in the draft plan where recreation does occur within the regional park. So the Lower Mangatawhiri area is already constrained and has, as I mentioned, a right to develop a dam and the reservoir in the future. So there are already constraints within the licence document in terms of how we can develop that land for recreation. But I must say that we have good ongoing discussions with Watercare and our wider directorate staff just about the types of activities that can occur within that area. And so we feel that, we've got a pretty good understanding about what we can do that doesn't feed to that future right. And in terms of the forestry area, based upon the analysis we've done, most of that forestry area is in fact held under the Local Government Act, so won't be affected by the decisions that are going to be made today in terms of classifying that land under the Reserves Act, where it is already held as reserve, as local purpose water conservation reserve. Next slide, please. So following decisions today about the classification proposals in the report, we will make sure that any further changes that are made today as a result of decisions are correctly recorded in the draft plan. We'll be publicly notifying reclassification proposals from the 10th of December, so that'll coincide with the draft plan if that is approved for notification today, and that'll run through to the 10th of February, just recognising that close down period. And then in March, we will present a report to the committee on any objections to the reclassification proposals and seek final decisions upon those. And we'll arrange for all classification decisions, both those ones that are non-notified, so that's the ones that are in the first 2 recommendations, as well as these ones that are going through a notification process. We'll arrange for those to be gazetted through the community facilities team. And subsequent to that, we will update the plan if that's required following those final decisions in March, and we'll also make any changes to Council's database as well. Thank you, Chair. It's time for Pātai for you.
Yeah, no, kapai. Thank you, Matthew. And I think the relevant is the last bullet point, which is coming back to us in March. So that's the relevant point. Look, if we got any Pātai, because I know that all of us have gone on Nexus and looked at not only this particular cover PowerPoint, but also with the recommendations. So, Councillor Walker, a question. No comments, just a question, please.
Sure. So I've got a question around the limited options around the consideration of revegetation, particularly planting trees to meet our climate change requirements. the reason I'm asking this question is that the land on regional parks is arguably the best land available for planting trees as compared to investing money in street trees. And at the same time, it would reduce emissions faster than anything else through the retirement of livestock, which is by far and away the most rapid response we can make to reducing emissions than almost anything else. So my question is around what information is going to be available for an assessment of those options to people wanting to make submissions, given that we're in a climate emergency. And a further question around the necessity, I would suggest, to revisit some of these matters in the near term, because it's highly likely that the climate emergency will escalate in the near term. So if I could have an answer to that, Mr. Chair, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yep, no problems. I'll get that answer at the next item, where the relevance is there. This is around classification. It's not about what you've just asked the partai on. And
My
as
apologies.
Put in, let me finish,
Okay.
please. Let me finish, please. So what's happened, Councillor Walker, is that in the next item, that will be put to the team once we've gone through. So I move to Matua Glen.
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman. Yes, look, my query's around a couple of items that are in the list for reclassification, but I'd actually like to have a background corridor. Is that possible, rather than bring it out here? Because it's just too specific. Is that possible, Matthew?
Yeah, look, anything's possible, Matt. Is just to have a corridor with Matua Glen.
Absolutely.
Even post this, Matthew, sorry. If you can confirm that, that'll be great.
Absolutely fine to have a background chat about that.
Yes, thank you.
Kapai, because again, it comes back to us in March of next year around the reclassification or final reclassification. So if there's no more partai, as it has been moved and seconded, are there any whakaaro before I put it?
Haere tonu.
Aye, 3-second rule. So look, there's none. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Against? Carried. Kia ora. We'll move into the next item.